Hello, and welcome to our third conversation in our Inside 2020 Salon series. I'm Karen Mathis, President and General Manager of KUOW Puget Sound Public Radio. Our special guests who will be having a discussion and inviting your questions today are Ayesha Rascoe, White House reporter for NPR, and our own Austin Jenkins, Olympia-based politics and government reporter for the Northwest News Network. We've had tremendous response to the prior two Inside 2020 salons with virtual attendance in the hundreds. I believe that part of the reason for this success is that we asked you what you wanted. A survey was sent to our broadcaster circle members, and it revealed that it was not distraction that you were seeking, but detail, understanding, and more of an insider's look into the work of bringing you the news. A good friend of mine who still lives in DC sent me a picture of a t-shirt that said, "These past 3 months have been the craziest 10 years of my life." And indeed, that is what it feels like. As a Black woman in America, I regularly worry that this cycle that we're currently in is taking 10 years off my life. As if navigating a pandemic wasn't enough, having to absorb the daily onslaught of evidence of how cheaply the lives of Black, Indigenous, persons of color are held has left me at times emotionally bruised, raw, angry, and despondent. I'd hazard a guess that each of you are having a poignant and very individualized journey through this tumult, keyed to your specific life experience and worldview. We can listen to and empathize with one another and commit to work for further change. We must protect our energy because there is so much to process and digest. We need truth now and trusted sources of information so that we can navigate all of this and the access that NPR and KUOW can provide to rigorous journalism and experienced contextual eyewitness accounts and analysis set us apart. Let me put a finer point on that. The hard work, courage, fortitude, and selflessness of journalists, such as the ones you're hearing from today, are what set us apart. The work of journalists is crucial, but just as crucial is the community that supports them. So thank you. Thank you so much. The generosity of you and thousands of others like you as we're closing out this fiscal year is allowing us to look forward with hope and plans for what else we can cover for you. Leading our conversation this afternoon is Austin Jenkins, who's been with the Northwest News Network since 2004. N3, as it's known, is a collaborative regional news hub supported by KUOW and 8 other principal partner stations and 3 affiliate stations across Washington and Oregon. Austin covers Northwest politics, public policy, and the Washington State Legislature. His reporting has garnered numerous awards, and he was part of a reporting team in 2018 that received a national Edward R. Murrow Award for breaking news coverage. As White House reporter for NPR, Ayesha Rascoe covers breaking news and policy developments from the White House. Before travel lockdowns, Ayesha often journeyed internationally with the president, including the 2019 summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong Un and the 2018 summit with Russian President Putin. Ayesha is a regular on the NPR Politics Podcast. I'm pleased to present these 2 fine journalists who work on your behalf to find the facts, to hold power into account, and above all, protect your right to know. So thank you. Thank you again for making their work and our work possible. So Austin, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Karen. Welcome, Ayesha. We're so happy to have you. Great to see you.
Glad to be here.
Just a little bit of housekeeping here for our virtual audience. We would love to hear from you during the next hour. You can type your questions into the comments section. We'll try to get as many of them as possible. We are meeting on Zoom in a different place and time. Maybe we would be in person. Maybe we'd be together in person in a venue, but we're not in this case. So, Ayesha, I am in the White House. I kid you not. Or actually, that's the Olympia Bureau here at the Capitol campus, and we call it the White House.
Okay.
I take it you're not in the White House today.
No, I am at home. I am in my bedroom, which is the only quiet place I can get, although the family has left the building for right now. So
So no interruptions. I was hoping to meet the kids.
Yeah, they like to make their big grand interruptions, but hopefully not tonight.
Okay. Well, thank you. It's much appreciated. I know it's later in the day there, so thanks for being with us. It was a lot to get to, but I do want to acknowledge and just start out with the fact that it has been a historic several weeks in this country. It has also been, as Karen talked about, an emotional few weeks for Black Americans, for Black journalists. Karen used the words raw, angry, despondent. Just colleague to colleague, I'd like to check in with you and ask, how are you doing?
It has been a challenging time. I think there's no need to try to sugarcoat it. It has been, I was laughing, when she said that, the past 3 months have been like the longest 10 years of my life. That's what it's felt like. I mean, people forget, like, even just, as a journalist covering the White House, we started out the year with impeachment, which was a lot. It was very busy for me, at least. And then you go from that to just a little slice of the campaign, and then a pandemic. And now these issues that have been going on for hundreds of years, but now once again bubbling to the surface as a Black American, seeing the protests, seeing the death of George Floyd, and all of these other things happening back to back. It takes a lot, and I think that it's hard as a journalist because you don't get to unplug. If I wasn't a journalist, I wouldn't listen to everything. I could take a break, but you have to, be here in this moment. And you have to, I'm grateful for being able to be here and to be a witness and to be someone and to have a voice in this moment. But yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that with us, and thanks for the work you do. You are a trusted voice, and the fact that you're there covering the White House for us and this presidency in particular, is much appreciated. Can you tell us a little bit about how you found your way into journalism? A short mini version maybe of your life story, but I'm always interested, why journalism? Why the news business?
Yeah, so I would say, so the short version is that I just, I was always into reading and always into history and all of that. And so I just gravitated to reading the newspaper, even as a kid, even in, high school. So I just, whenever there was like a journalism thing to do, I did it. So I worked on my, there was my local newspaper had a teen section. I did that. They also had, and so I was on the school newspaper. I went to Howard University. I majored in print journalism, and really kind of the rest is history. I worked for a very long time at Reuters, which is a news agency. And then now I've been at NPR for about 2 years now, going on, more than 2 years now, about 2.5. So
just briefly, why the transition from print, from Reuters to public radio?
I was at Reuters for 10 years, and it gave me a good foundation. You have to be fast, you have to be accurate, and you have to, get the news out, the facts. So it gave me a good foundation. I think I was ready to try something new. And what I've enjoyed about being at NPR, especially doing the Politics Podcast and everything else, I've got to show a little bit more of my personality, and the audience for NPR. They are so committed, and there's just a different way that they interact with reporters, because they feel like it's personal to them, because they hear you on the radio, they hear you in their homes, they hear you in their car. And so it's a much more personal connection. So I really like that.
Yeah, the byline is a big deal, but that personal connection, the voice, that is unparalleled, and it is a special relationship we have with our listeners. there's so much news, so much going on. It's hard to even know where to begin, but let's begin with the John Bolton book because there's a lot of interest. It's not the first time a former administration official has come out with a quote unquote tell all or something critical of the president, but that seems like with the Justice Department's help, the president is doing a lot to try to quash this, keep it from getting out, although, it's already leaked out or portions of it have. But what's he worried about, and how big a deal is this? Is it going to be a blip, or could this, crumble the presidency?
I think that, well, this presidency has been through a lot of tell-all books and a lot of, this is kind of, I would almost say that this is the sort of thing that I think the Trump administration is more used to dealing with, honestly, like to have a former official accusing them of, so now I will say that
practice.
Yeah, they have practice. But I will say that John Bolton, being in the position that he was, National Security Advisor, and the charges that he's making against the president are very serious. So I don't want to downplay them at all. But I do think that this White House they went through impeachment, that they already got through that. And so I think they feel very secure in their position. But President Trump is not someone who is, he views himself as someone who is a fighter. And so if you are going to try to come against him, he's going to throw the book at you legally. And that's what he's done with all of this, whether it was with his taxes, any of this stuff, he throws up every legal challenge. At this point with this book, the cow is already out, or the horse is out of the barn, right? Like, people have copies of the book, so you're not going to be able to, keep this book hidden. But I think right now, it's really about making John Bolton pay, and maybe even with like his profits from the book, and really just making it very difficult for John Bolton. And it's probably personal, right? Like, he just doesn't like that John Bolton has said these negative things about him. But I think that this is the sort of landscape that the president is used to dealing with, saying, oh, they said this negative thing about me, but it's not true. Just going, it doesn't matter. This is a type of fight that they're very used to having.
Yeah. One of our audience members is wondering if there's any revelations that have come out so far that surprise you or confirm something you already thought, anything that's just jumping off the page at the moment.
I think there are a lot of things that are surprising. I think the stuff about him directly saying China to Xi of China, we need your help, like for me to get reelected. I need you to buy these, I need you to buy these soybeans from the farmers. You have to help me. The fact that it was so explicit, obviously also him saying that he was Bolton accusing the president, or saying that the president said that he was okay with the Chinese building concentration camps for the Uyghurs, which is, a population there that is being oppressed. I think that is shocking and surprising. To have someone saying that they were in the room or when these things were happening. I think that, like I said, I don't want to say that these aren't serious. And they're also shocking to have someone at this level saying, not that they necessarily heard it, or not saying that this is hearsay, but saying, yeah, I was there when the president directly asked for help with the election. That's pretty huge, right? Like, that's a big deal. And the stuff about the Uyghurs, it's really, it's really jarring.
Yeah. What is, and there's so many other topics we could hit on, including the president's now taking on the Supreme Court because he's had a couple of rulings that he didn't see in his favor. He's talking about new Supreme Court justices that he might appoint. But let's just step back. You covered, if I'm remembering correctly, the last year of the Obama White House for Reuters, and now obviously the Trump presidency. What is it like, being on the inside there? And I know on top of it all, even on a normal day, it's interesting, but you layer in all of the things you've talked about that are going on in the news in 2020. What's it like?
It is. I think it's hard to describe it because it has been. But what I would say is the chaos that you see, like from the outside, it is that chaotic inside. Like, it is a chaotic place. It is a chaotic environment, and And it's something that it's hard to know from day to day, like what's going to happen. You just never know. Like President Trump could tweet something and it changes the whole tone of your day. Like like you thought you were going to be doing one thing, but then he sends out a tweet and it's a whole other thing.
I was picturing, do you have to wake up in the middle of the night and check your phone to see if he's been tweeting it?
It happens. I mean, that when he sent that tweet, when the shooting starts, that was at 1 a.m. And I was awake because so much was going on at that moment. And I have alerts. So my phone beeps when President Trump tweets. And so I saw that tweet as it happened. And I knew that this was going to be a serious thing like that.
So what do you do? Just take us inside. What do you do in that moment? It's 1 a.m. He's just tweeted that. I mean, it's not abnormal that he's tweeting in the middle of the night, but this is so striking and shocking.
So in that moment, we're not on the air, and I knew that they weren't going to want something right then. But so I tried to go to sleep. It took me a while to go to sleep that night, I'll be honest. But the next day, it was just Twitter had, put a warning message on it. It was, and then he was responding. It was just all this snowball effect. So the next day, I was writing the story for that. I think I was on the air. Maybe I know we did the podcast. It was just, one thing after another, because he had said this statement, and he has these tweets that cross a line, and he tweets a lot, and a lot of things that he says any other president would have gotten in trouble for, but for this, this was one of those tweets that crossed the line, and that people will remember, I think, for a very long time. And it was a moment.
Yeah. This is a good moment to just remind our audience that we are taking your questions. We are getting some great questions, but the way to do that is in the comments section. And I want to just pivot to an audience member's question about, you were talking about the chaos in the White House. Are there 2 or 3 people currently, and I know that this may be a changing cast of kind of characters, but official or unofficial, who the president is most listening to? And obviously we're in a campaign season too, but who's influencing his behavior and his actions and decision making right now, do you think?
Well, I think that the person who influences the president the absolute most is Donald J. Trump. Like, I think he does what he wants to do, but outside of Donald J. Trump, and what his gut and his instinct tells him to do, the other people that have a lot of influence is obviously Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner. So his daughter and son-in-law. I think they in the White House are obviously the survivors. And I do think that they will survive. Well, Ivanka will always survive, right? Jared, as long as he stick with Ivanka, he gonna survive too. But they are the people that are extremely influential. I mean, you see Jared has been involved in everything. It almost becomes, people joke about, him trying to get Middle East peace and all these things, but he is very influential with what came out this week with the executive order on policing. That's something that Jared Kushner worked on very, that was something that he was instrumental in. And there's reporting that when President Trump went to St. John's, that was Ivanka Trump's idea. So they do have a lot of influence, and they are the people in the White House who aren't going to get fired. Everybody else, we don't know. You might see the door, but Ivanka and Jared, they're going to be around.
How easy or how hard is it to get administration officials to talk to you candidly on background or off the record about what's really going on behind the scenes?
I mean, it depends. I mean, it can be hard to get people to talk. And sometimes I think part of the issue is that there's a question of, I think one of the hardest things with this administration is when you're trying to figure out what's going on. And sometimes I think people really don't know, because sometimes there doesn't seem to really be a plan, or this person is saying this and this person is saying that. And there have been instances where someone who was in a position to know told told me or told our team that something was going to happen or the president wasn't going to do this, and this person was in a position to know, and then the president did the exact opposite. And I don't think that person was lying. I think they really didn't know what he was going to do.
Right.
And so often you
the plans changed.
The plan changed. And so often you'll see that even when they're telling you something, they're saying, as far as I know in this moment, this is what we're thinking. That could always change. Yeah. And so I think that that's sometimes there is genuine confusion because people don't know like what's happening. So sometimes when you get a tweet that comes out, the president will put out some statement and you ask about it, they'll just say the tweet speaks for itself. And that just means they don't know what it means and they don't know what the implications are and they don't know, what's happening. Right. And that happens.
All of this news is happening in a big election year. And I've noticed just covering a state governor and state government that there's been very little time for our governor who's seeking a third term to actively campaign. I mean, never mind the disruption that COVID-19 has, but it's just been, press conferences every other day and you're having to govern. Now we're seeing a transition for the president. He's going to be holding this rally in Tulsa. Out of curiosity, one of our audience members wants to know, are you going on that trip? Anybody?
No, I won't be on that trip. We're not in the pool for that. So we're not going to be there. And we're not traveling there separately. So I won't be in Tulsa. I may be talking about it, but I won't be in Tulsa.
There'll be a lot. Obviously, you can watch it remotely. But what are you noticing? What are you noticing about kind of governing versus campaigning? And is there a transition that's about to happen or that's happening? How does that work when there's so much going on?
I mean, I do think that there is there's a definite, like the president is always really campaigning, like he's been campaigning even from the beginning. But right now that I think that's what the White House wants, they don't want to be talking about the coronavirus. President Trump has made clear he doesn't want to talk about that. He wants to move on to, return to greatness, recovery summer. That's what he wants the focus to be on. And so that's where you can see now they're having, a lot of events that are focused on everything getting restarted, what he's doing for the veterans, what he's doing for the senior citizens, what he's doing for this group. That's what they want to be talking about. The problem, of course, is that the pandemic isn't over. And so and it doesn't seem like the pandemic is wanting to cooperate with that, but the president is moving forward with campaigning, and he wants to campaign in the traditional way, which is rallies.
Right, rallies. This also lends a question about Joe Biden, and one of our audience members is just asking, is the speculation and conversation is picking up over a vice presidential pick for Biden? How are you? Who are you guessing might be the pick, if you have a guess? And what do you think about the importance of that role for this Democratic ticket in 2020?
So I don't know who he will pick. There's a lot of speculation that he will pick a Black woman for his vice president, because obviously there has been a huge issue of race in this country because of the way that Black women have really been the backbone of the Democratic Party. And the thought that you need someone who is going to be able to energize young people of color to come out who may not be sold on Joe Biden. Now, does that mean Kamala Harris? Does that mean, Val Demings, who's a congresswoman, but also who played a big role in impeachment, and also was like a police chief? Or Stacey Abrams from Georgia. I think that those women are clearly in the mix. I don't know if that's who he's going to go with. I don't want to, and then I also don't want to, be reductive and just say, well, he needs to pick a Black woman. But I think that there's going to be a question if he does not, if he makes a different choice. he likely will need to have an explanation for why he did not, because there has been so much call for him to do so.
Yeah. The president is often underestimated. What is your sense that, I mean, the polls are not looking good for him right now. The polls in swing states are not looking good for him. Of course, Biden is not out on the campaign trail, and everything, in terms of traditional campaigning, has been thrown into disarray. But what is your sense of the president's vulnerability going into this 2020 election?
Well, before the pandemic happened, I mean, he had this booming economy. He is the incumbent. So, I mean, he really had the wind at his back. And that's kind of what he was telling the Wall Street Journal in an interview that, just came out. Like, he did. Now, I think I do not know what will happen. I don't think anyone knows. So, I mean, I think that's a fact. No one knows what's going to happen. He is still the incumbent. He still has a very strong base. He still has a lot of people that are very enthusiastic about him. I don't think that anyone or any reasonable observer would count him out or say, President Trump is going to have a hard time winning this election. I don't think you can say that at all. But he has a lot of issues now that he did not have before. And I also think we have to be very humble about the fact that we did not know in January that we were going to have this pandemic and that everything would be turned upside down. And we do not know what is going to be happening in the fall. Like, we just don't know.
Yeah, it's way too much at this point.
I think all of that will make a huge difference. How does the US look in November? And I think that's the question.
Yeah. I do want to ask you, because the president has been quite focused actually of late on Washington State, and we're easily overlooked and forgotten, but he's been tweeting at the governor and at the mayor over this Capitol Hill organized protest that's taken over several blocks around a police station or precinct. He went up for about 4 minutes at a cabinet room event earlier in the week about this, and seemed to be suggesting that he was thinking about intervening if the governor didn't send the National Guard. What are we Washingtonians to make of this?
I think the president, this is the type of story that is kind of red meat for his base and for kind of right-wing outlets. Any talk of left groups on the left, this idea that there's chaos and that they need to be dealt with. That's red meat for his base. And so I think for President Trump, he wants to be law and order, quote unquote. And he wants to be able to say, I am the person standing between you and chaos. Like, you don't want those, people on the left to get control because it'll be chaos, right? Like that. I mean, that's what he wants to project. And so I think that's why he's focused on it so much. That's why they talk about Antifa. What is Antifa? Antifa is not an organized group. There's no leader, like this idea of saying Antifa is like a terrorist group. I think that's what it all is focused on. Of course, that comes with him not focusing on a lot of, right-wing groups who are being arrested for engaging in, planning violent acts. So you don't get that focus from President Trump. And then you also get this very weird argument where he's saying, vote for me or these bad things will happen, but the quote unquote bad things are happening. And he's president right now. So it's not, so the whole, I'm going to send in the military, I'm going to fix it. It's how does that actually work? Like, how is that actually happening? So,
well, it seems like mostly talk at this point. And is that a safe bet? Or do you think he actually has a list of 10 things he's planning or intending?
Well, he's threatened to send in the military to Chicago. He's threatened to send in, like back at the early parts of his administration. This has been a common thing. We're going to get the issue is that when,
was militarized a few weeks ago.
Yes. But when it happened with the National Guard, what happened with Minnesota, that was still under the governor. That wasn't Trump. He
Right.
was able to do some things in DC because DC is not a state. But I think the risk for President Trump when he was talking about the Insurrection Act and all of these things is that if he does that sort of thing, then he owns it. So if he really takes the action to sending and that was the risk. And why a lot of people I think were very doubtful that he was going to move ahead with the talk of bringing in the military, because once he does that, he owns that, right? And so it's much easier to talk about it and to rail against the governor and to rail against the mayor than to really take ownership of what happens after that.
One of our audience members is asking about what remains of the COVID task force. For a while, there were the daily briefings, and they were televised, and they went on for, it seemed, hours. And whatever happened to them?
There's still a task force, and I believe they're still meeting, but they're not doing it publicly. So you're not getting the briefings. So they still have experts. They still have, Dr. Birx is still around, and Vice President Pence is still working on these issues or helping to lead it. But that.
Fauci, the famous doctor in America.
Yeah, Dr. Fauci is still around, but he's not talking to President Trump as much.
Right.
But he's still around. So they're still there. I think that what the White House has tried to do is to take the focus off of the task force because they want to say the coronavirus is done. And they want to focus now on the economy. So the task force was part of them wanting to show that we're on top of what's happening with the coronavirus. Now they want to say, we just want to focus on the economy. Like I said, I don't know that the coronavirus is going to cooperate with that plan, but that's what they're carrying out.
And the president has, seems like in recent interviews, all but declared the COVID-19 pandemic or crisis essentially over, even though there's growing numbers of cases in many states around the country.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a big question with this rally is that you're going to have this rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yes, Oklahoma has, largely been spared from the coronavirus up until now, but their cases are going up. Right. And if you have this big rally indoors with people where they have the option of wearing a mask, there are real serious health risks. And so, we do not know what's going to happen. I mean, you cannot say definitively what's going to happen, but medical experts say this is a huge risk. Yeah. And so
not well advised, especially being indoors seems to be the key concern, and we're going to see what the results are of all of the protests outdoors. But I think it's pretty clear that being indoors and without a mask can be quite risky. Again, stepping back a little bit, with the pandemic, I know people are working remotely. It sounds like White House reporters are sort of cycling into the White House and taking turns. But what's your new reality been like? How do you cover this White House during a time of COVID-19?
It's been a journey. So I'm working from home most days. I do go into the White House maybe about once a week because we rotate in, because we're trying to, as a White House press corps, socially distance. So we're only there when we are, we have a rotation for when you're in that group of reporters that's always with the president. So we're only there when we are in that group for the day. So that's usually about once a week or maybe once every other week. I end up there or a colleague. And so it's different. You can't just, run to the press office and ask for questions, ask your questions or things like that. And then I'm at home and I'm a mom and I'm a wife and I got kids who, knock on the door during, morning edition. Yeah, my 2-year-old knocking on the door during morning edition and everybody yelling during the podcast. So it's I mean, you make the best of it, right? Like it could be much worse, but yeah. So it's been a transition for me and for my family, right? Because I'm just working from home.
Right. On a serious note, the president has shown animosity at times towards women of color in the press corps. And I'm just wondering if you have personally felt like he has treated you differently, what you've witnessed about the differential treatment among your colleagues, and what that's like when you're in the room with him.
I for a long time I had seen, what he had done to other reporters like Yamiche Alcindor, April Ryan, Abby Phillips. I had seen who worked for other outlets. I had seen him, Black women, I had seen him kind of go after them. And, you are, because there's only so many Black women, White House reporters. So you kind of felt like, is he going to attack me? Until recently, I hadn't really been attacked, but with the coronavirus, I asked a question in the Oval Office. I forget what threshold we had crossed, maybe 50,000 people had died or something like that. I don't know whether we were at 50,000 or above that, but I, basically asked, 50,000 people died. Do you take any responsibility for that? And he clearly did not like that question. He answered it, but then after that, he would not go back to me. And like, he intentionally, like when I, would say, hey, hold on. I'm trying to ask a question. He said, does anybody else have a question? No, thank you. And then like sent us out because he didn't want another question from me. And then another time and so after that, like he just, I guess he kind of,
you're on his radar.
I was on his radar. He didn't like the question. So like other times he would say, like, I asked a follow-up about a question and he was just like, when you get the answer, you guys are going to be embarrassed, especially you. And I hadn't even written the story, so I didn't have anything to be embarrassed about. But, so, I mean, in a series, like it is, I'm laughing about it, but it's not funny. It is difficult, especially the way he's talked to Yamiche Alcindor recently. And it can put a target on you. I haven't experienced the worst of that. I know April Ryan says she's received death threats.
She's with CNN.
Yeah, from CNN. She has received death threats. And so it is very serious. And so when the president puts a target on you, and the way that he has talked to, and a number of, especially women reporters, the way that he has gone after them, it is, and you're just trying to do your job. Like at a certain point, I'm just trying to do my job. I'm trying to ask questions. I'm not there to, it is my job to ask tough questions, and it is my job to push. That is my job. It's not to, I'm not a publicist, and I'm there to get answers and speak for those people who aren't there. And aren't in those positions. And so I take it very seriously, but I'm a human being. So when someone is kind of coming at you that way, or specifically targeting you to not answer your questions, it's not easy.
Yeah. And then just the whole kind of social media environment can be so toxic and dangerous at times. Have you felt targeted on social media or in other settings? Do you ever feel like, as a reporter covering this White House, as a Black woman covering this White House, that you are under threat or in any danger, or are you being attacked online?
I haven't gotten threats. I have got, I get at times, just really, I get some racist statements thrown at me. I get people, making fun of the way I talk, making fun of, calling me names or calling me ghetto or whatever they want to call me, because that's what they want to kind of put me in my quote unquote place, or what they think my place is. So I get some of that. I haven't gotten the worst of it. Luckily, I haven't gotten that target the way some other reporters have, but I've seen it. And any time when, especially if I'm on a panel with, I talked about April, when I was on a panel with her once, And we just and she just tweeted, people tweeted about it. All of a sudden, I saw the trolls that kind of follow her around, got into my timeline, and we're just talking bad about us because we were just talking about being Black women covering the White House. And it was just like that just struck a nerve. And so you see this just kind of nastiness that just comes out, just for existing, just for trying to do your job.
Gosh, I'm so sorry that happens, and I really appreciate you talking about it. I hope you know that your audience and your listeners really, again, appreciate the work you do and send a lot of love your way and a lot of support, because that's more than any one person should bear.
And I do, and I have to say that the vast majority, all the listeners have been really kind to me, and so I get much more love than I've gotten hate, and that has meant a lot.
Right. Well, we are talking to Ayesha Rascoe, who's the NPR White House reporter. If you have questions, please post them. We'll try to get to them. Question from an audience member about the podcast, which you do a lot, and just how kind of the editorial piece here. How do you divide up which stories to cover with your colleagues, whether to do the podcast or a two-way interview with a host on the radio, or what we call a package or a produced piece? How do you get stuff turned around quickly in a very kind of kinetic news cycle environment? But also public radio is known for going in depth and giving people a little, context. So how does it work behind the scenes?
So we have a schedule. So generally, and there are certain things that we, on the White House team that maybe we do a lot of, like Franco Ordonez, he does a lot of like immigration. So today is a day when because there was a ruling in the Supreme Court on DACA, he would probably do something on that because he has some expertise with that. And so we kind of divide it up, but we have a schedule. So if I'm on the early show, then I'll be on up first. And then, it depends on what the news of the day is and what we.
Are you actually staggering shifts then?
Yeah. So it was somewhat staggered. So if you're on the really early shift, like if you do up first, then you leave earlier, theoretically. Sometimes it doesn't work out. And then if you are the kind of, it's not really the night person, but it's like if you're the person who's more White House PM, then you're there throughout the day. And if something breaks later, then you would be on ATC, or you might update ATC later. So if something breaks at like 7, 8 o'clock at night. And so we kind of divide it up that way. And then it just kind of depends on what we're working on. Sometimes you might have a longer piece where you have a plan, like, okay, I'm going to get this piece out. And so I really have to focus on that. So I can't do the podcast today. I just have to focus on this and just to get this out. And then sometimes it'll be a day where it's like, we need you on the podcast, and then we need you on All Things Considered. And then for a two-way.
Everywhere, all the time.
Yes. So, and you just kind of have to do it all. And then you do those top of the hour, what you hear at the top of the hour, our newscast. Then you got to do those short little things. And sometimes you're just doing it all. So not necessarily a piece, usually, because as you said, a piece takes time. So usually if you're doing a piece, you're just kind of focused on the piece, and you have to write your digital story. So write the story for the website. It's just it kind of depends on how things are going and if you're, with what you're tasked with that day. But sometimes you're doing it all and you're just kind of turning around as fast as possible. Well, we have editors that help and, help us get everything together.
Have you guys come up with sort of an organizing principle for how to cover this White House for public media, for NPR? You're not CNN, not the New York Times. Do you have a little more flexibility to let things go or to focus here but not there? How does that decision-making process work?
It depends. I mean, I would say it depends. We do have like a foreign desk that's really good, that does like a lot of the foreign policy, or international desk that does a lot of the foreign policy, some of the foreign policy stuff. We have a national desk. So sometimes, if it's a school shooting, you might have someone who's on the ground from the national desk doing that. And then we're just covering whatever Trump says about it. I think that what we try to do is see if there are areas where we can, provide a different type of coverage or find something unique. And I think one of the unique things that we could do, especially before the pandemic, was actually getting out and talking to people, doing like you said, those pieces where you're talking to voters and you get, the sound of the rally or the protest and then you're talking to a variety of people and really telling their stories or letting them tell their stories, and how they impact the news. And so really putting a more human, or just getting the humanity behind the news. And so I think that we do try to do that, and we're still going to try to do that even with the pandemic. It's a little bit harder now, obviously, for safety reasons, but I think we're still committed to doing that and trying to make sure that we're talking to the people who are actually impacted by these policies.
Yeah. With respect to the president, and this is another question from an audience member, but for instance, you reported this week on his executive order on police reform, and I think your reporting reflected that there were some substantive pieces of this. It doesn't go as far as many Democrats would want, but there was substance there. The question is that John Bolton seems to be suggesting or indicating that Trump's only guidepost is re-election. That's the thing that animates him, and the only thing he's focused on. From your vantage point, do you see more complexity, and do you see him thinking about policy, or is it all about re-election all the time?
Yeah, I won't try to speak for what is necessarily in the president's mind, but what I will say is that you can see that the focus is on re-election, like that. I mean, it's a driving, and in many ways, Trump is very transparent about the fact that he thinks in terms of re-election, whatever the event is. Like I've always joked, it could be an event with the Boy Scouts, like he did early on, and he's going to be bashing Democrats. Like whatever it is, he is going to, and you can see, especially in events now, every event is, he's talking, about Joe Biden, he's talking about the Democrats, and everything is put in that framework of, I am the president. And even with him doing the executive order, it's about, I, Donald Trump, have done more for African Americans than, other presidents. So that's why you need to vote for me. I'm doing this for you. Look, I did it. And so it's very much put in these very blunt terms. And so I think that you don't see a lot, or you don't hear the nuance. It's very blunt.
Behind him, what's the policy shop?
Well, he has Brooke Rollins, who is the head of his domestic policy council. And she is someone who actually has a history of she's from Texas, but she worked a lot on criminal justice reform. And that was her focus before she came to the White House. And that's why she was brought on by Jared Kushner, who played a key role in getting this criminal justice reform law passed, the First Step Act. So she does have some policy chops, and so I think that there are people behind him who do a lot of work on policy. I don't know, or I have not seen President Trump be super focused on the details, but he has people behind him, at least trying to get things done. What happens at times, though, is that you see that you have a White House where the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. So sometimes the policy is inconsistent because you don't have someone at the top really guiding what to do next. You have different groups kind of competing to get whatever they want done.
Yeah. You've reported on Black conservatives who support him, and he's also often says that he has done more for Black Americans than any president, with the exception of Lincoln.
Well, sometimes he doesn't make the exception for Lincoln.
Oh.
So sometimes he don't. I guess sorry to cut you off. But one thing I do find about, when he does that, he does it specifically with African Americans, but he really does it with one thing about this administration that I do find that always stands out to me is that they always behave as if they are the first presidency that ever happened. There's no context. They don't acknowledge that things have happened before them. So what President Trump is saying is that he has a list of things that he has done for African Americans, opportunity zones, the First Step Act that I talked about, the criminal justice reform, and some other things. And so he'll say, I did this for African Americans, but he won't stop there. He'll say, I've done more than anybody else. But the thing is, other presidents had lists too. Like, he's not the first president, right, to have a list of accomplishments. And I think that's what this White House often does, is like they say they have this list of accomplishments. Every White House has a list of accomplishments, right? Like, every White House has done things. And you have LBJ, who passed signed the Civil Rights Act. You have Truman, who integrated the military. They're not the first White House. This is a White House that doesn't have that sense of history. They are very much operating in this mindset that they are the first to ever do anything. Right. And that is not true.
Yeah. Time did not begin in 2016.
It did not.
What do you make of these recent reports about the president's health?
I think that there are questions that we just simply cannot answer. So I try not to speculate because we don't have any answer for it, right? We don't, obviously he put out, his physician put out a statement about his physical for this year. It wasn't very detailed. He did, make a trip to, to the military hospital. That was unexplained and still unexplained after all these months. But I think that President Trump obviously makes attacks on Joe Biden and his health and his fitness, but I think those are questions that people can have and can raise, but we just really don't have any answer to it. Like, there's just no way for us to know about the nature of his health. So
this is also a president and a presidency where the media has really grappled with just how to cover it. I mean, he's obviously upended all of the norms. One of our audience members is asking how you deal with the situation when what has just been said by the president is not true, that it's a lie. What do you do? Do you go on the air and say, President lied today?
Well, I mean, we don't necessarily go on and say that he lied. We don't use that word. And there's a lot of debate. And I think that it is worth debating about. And I think that the media is still trying to figure out the best way to respond to President Trump, because he doesn't play by the norms that other presidents have abided by and other politicians and public figures have abided by. But what I will not do is I'm not going to get on air and repeat something that's not true as if it were true. And I'm not, and I think that as an industry, we have at least gotten to the point where not everybody, but most outlets will try not to just repeat what President Trump says, pigs are flying, and that's your headline. You don't have to, I don't feel like being a journalist means you take your brain out of your head and set it down. And what I try to do, and what we try to do at NPR, is if he says something that is not true, this thing called a truth sandwich, you probably have heard, you put the truth first, say, pigs are not flying. President Trump says they're flying, but they are not flying. And so put the truth first, say what he says, and then put the truth again. And also,
two truths and a lie.
Yeah, two truths and a lie. But also making a real decision about trying not to, you don't have to repeat everything. And so, especially if it's a very short, if I'm doing like a top of the hour, 40-second spot, I'm going to try not to put something in there that I cannot fact check. Sure. And that I cannot give context to, and trying not to make sure that I'm not repeating things that are not true or not based in fact.
Yeah. We have just a few minutes left, and this is an opportunity, and there's a spotlight right now on police and policing in America and police reform. It's also an opportunity for media organizations, for journalism to grow and evolve and get better. Do you have any thoughts about what you would hope could come out of this moment in history in terms of our profession, and especially public media?
Yeah, I think that this is a moment where we really need to focus on making sure that a variety of voices are being heard. And particularly, when we're talking about police, talking about the effects on the African American community, on the Latino community, others, but especially with the African American community. Um, and really, I think this is a time to really interrogate the way that we cover the police. We have, the media has for so long always taken or seemed to take whatever the police say or law enforcement says as this is the fact. Well, the fact is, this is what the police officer said, and therefore that is the fact. And what we are seeing is that things are much more complicated than that. And I think that it's also about being willing to give a voice to these communities, not just when something happens, not just when something is on fire, not
Not when
going
people are
in.
protesting in the streets.
Yes, like paying attention, because these things don't happen out of nowhere, but you don't pay attention to it. And then there's this explosion of action. Um, and I think that there are a lot of people who are really, and rightfully so, just feel disconnected, not because they're not engaged and not because they don't care, but because they don't feel like systems and the media and other people in power have not listened to them and are not genuinely interested in hearing them and paying attention to what they need and they want. And I think that I hope that this is a time where we can really be committed to making a change in that.
Just finally, and I know you don't have a crystal ball, and I know that you are on a beat where you really can't plan for the future, but what do you think the next 6 months, the second half of 2020 might hold? What are you preparing for, or how are you preparing, because it is so unknown?
I think I'm preparing with, a lot of prayer and, just just trying, hoping and prayer and meditation. I think that this has been a rough start to a year, and like, being in all seriousness, it's been a really rough start. And a lot of people have lost their lives to the pandemic, and you've had protests, and you have had just unrest, and a lot of, the not real history of the US, because it's still happening, but those skeletons, those things coming to the surface. And people are hurting, and that is very real. And so I hope that the next 6 months will bring some healing and some resolution. And hopefully, there is some room for optimism to move forward and some changes, and that people can be safe in this pandemic. So that's what I hope for. But after this first 6 months, I think it is so hard to predict what comes next.
Right, and be prepared for anything.
Yeah.
Well, Ayesha Rascoe, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and we really appreciate you giving up part of your evening in Washington, D.C. to speak to us here in Washington State and elsewhere.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and be safe, and thanks again for your work. We also want to thank our audience for tuning in. This has been a really enlightening and interesting and moving hour. We will be posting these discussions on KUOW's YouTube channel, so you can watch them again, share them with your friends and family. Thank you to our audience for being here tonight. And again, thank you, Ayesha. Good night.
Thank you.